The rain came without warning that evening. The streets of Portland glistened under streetlights, and people hurried under umbrellas trying to escape the chill. Ethan Cole wasn't one of them. He walked slowly, his coat unbuttoned, his thoughts scattered. He had stayed late at work again, and his mind was a mix of exhaustion and quiet emptiness. Everything in his life had started to feel mechanical: work, home, sleep, repeat. He didn't know what he was looking for when he turned onto Maple Street. Maybe just a reason to stop thinking. That's when he saw the glow from the small art gallery tucked between two coffee shops. The sign above the glass door read Weston Studio. The soft light spilling from inside felt warm against the cold night. Something about it made him pause. He almost walked past it, but then he saw a figure through the window, a woman standing alone, staring at a painting of the ocean. Her calm posture and the way she tilted her head toward the painting caught his attention. It was as if she wasn't just looking at art. She was remembering something. Ethan hesitated for a moment, then pushed the door open. A bell above it chimed softly. Inside, the scent of fresh paint and wood polish filled the air. The space was quiet, except for the faint sound of rain tapping against the windows. He felt out of place, still in his work clothes, surrounded by color and creativity. But then she turned and everything else disappeared. She was beautiful in a simple, unforced way. Her light brown hair was pulled back loosely, a few strands framing her face. Her gray sweater was smudged with paint near the sleeves. She looked like someone who didn't try to be perfect in it. That made her unforgettable. When she noticed him, she smiled politely. It wasn't a flirtatious smile. It was gentle, curious, but it stayed on her face just a second longer than politeness required. And that second felt like forever. Ethan looked at the painting she had been studying, a large canvas of a stormy sea. "It feels alive," he said quietly. His voice surprised even him. He wasn't usually the type to speak first, especially to strangers. She turned toward him fully, her expression soft but confident. "It's one of mine," she said. Her tone carried warmth, but there was a hint of vulnerability too. Like she wasn't used to being noticed for her work. Ethan blinked. "You painted this?" She nodded. "All of these," she added, gesturing around the room. He looked around and noticed her name signed in the corner of each PC. "Weston, I'm impressed," he said, and he meant it. The paintings weren't just art. They were emotion on canvas. He could feel the weight of each brushstrokes, the loneliness, the hope, the quiet strength. Claire looked at the sea painting again. "I like to paint what I can't explain," she said softly. "Sometimes feelings make more sense in color than in words." Ethan found himself smiling. That's a beautiful way to put it. For a while, they stood in silence, just looking at the artwork together. It was strange how natural it felt, standing next to someone he'd just met. There was no small talk, no awkwardness. The world outside was wet and gray, but inside that little gallery, time seemed to slow down. After a few minutes, Claire asked, "Do you come to galleries often?" Ethan chuckled. "Not really. I just saw the lights and came in. Guess I needed a break from spreadsheets." She laughed softly. "Spreadsheets? That sounds thrilling." He grinned. "Yeah, it's about as exciting as it sounds." Her laugh was the kind of sound that lingered in the air even after it faded. It wasn't loud, but it had warmth, a reminder that laughter doesn't need to be big to be beautiful. They talked a little more. About how she started painting. About how he used to draw when he was younger, but gave it up. The conversation wasn't deep, but it was effortless. There was an ease in her company that Ethan hadn't felt in a long time as he looked at her. He noticed something else, a trace of sadness in her eyes. She carried it quietly, like someone who had learned to live with it. He didn't ask, but he felt it. It made her seem even more real. After a while, the gallery lights flickered, signaling closing time. Claire looked at her watch. "I should probably lock up soon," she said. Ethan nodded, realizing how much time had passed. "Right? I should get going." He paused, then smiled. "Thank you for letting me interrupt your evening." She tilted her head slightly. "You didn't interrupt. It was nice to have someone actually look at the art. Ethan hesitated before walking toward the door. The rain outside had softened, the world quieter now. He turned back once more. Maybe I'll come back, if that's okay. Her lips curved into that same gentle smile. I'd like that. He stepped outside, and the bell above the door chimed again as it closed behind him. He walked down the wet street, hands in his pockets, his mind replaying her smile, her words, her eyes. He didn't understand it yet. But something had shifted inside him. Claire watched him through the window for a moment before turning off the lights. She didn't know why that brief encounter felt different, but it did. Maybe it was the way he spoke, not trying to impress, not pretending to know more than he did. Just honest, kind, and a little lost. She had met many people in her gallery, but Ethan felt real that night. As she stood alone in the quiet room, she looked once more at the sea painting. The waves seemed to move under the dim light, alive and restless. She smiled faintly. Maybe, she whispered to herself, storms bring more than just rain. Outside, Ethan walked without realizing how far he had gone. The sound of the rain faded behind him, replaced by the echo of her voice in his mind. For the first time in months, he didn't feel tired. He felt awake. He didn't know what this meant, or if he would ever see her again. But one thing was certain. Something about that moment in the gallery would stay with him, and though neither of them knew it yet, that brief look, that single spark of connection, had already begun to rewrite both their stories. That night would become the first page of something. Neither of them planned for something that would test the boundaries between longing, honesty, and love. Because sometimes all it takes to change everything is one look that lasts too long. The rain had long stopped, but Ethan couldn't stop thinking about that night in the gallery. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Claire standing there by her painting, calm, distant, and somehow familiar. He told himself it was nothing, that he just admired her art. But deep down, he knew it wasn't about the paintings anymore. Something about her had stayed with him. Quietly, but persistently. Days turned into weeks, and life went on in its usual rhythm. Ethan worked his long office hours, sat through endless meetings, and tried to focus on numbers and reports. But in between, his mind wandered back to that gallery, that quiet smile, that look that lasted too long. One afternoon, without really deciding to, he found himself walking down Maple Street again. The gallery lights were on. He hesitated for a moment before stepping in. The same bell chimed above the door. The same scent of paint and wood filled the air. Claire was there, standing by a new painting, this one softer, with calm water instead of storms. She turned when she heard the door and smiled. "You came back," she said. Ethan shrugged lightly, smiling back. "Guess I couldn't stay away." She laughed softly. "That's what art is supposed to do. Pull you back in." He looked around the room. "Or maybe it's the artist," he said before he could stop himself. Her eyes met his, a mix of amusement and surprise. She didn't answer, but her smile deepened slightly. They talked for a while that day about her upcoming exhibit, about how she started painting after leaving her old corporate job, about how she'd lost someone important a few years ago. Ethan didn't press for details, but he could feel the weight behind her words. It wasn't sadness that defined her, it was strength built from it. She asked about him, too. And he hesitated before answering. "I used to draw," he admitted. "But somewhere between deadlines and bills, I forgot why." Claire looked at him for a long second, then said, "Maybe you didn't forget. Maybe you just stopped listening." That line stayed with him long after he left. It echoed in his head that night as he sat in his small apartment, staring at a blank notebook. Her words stirred something inside him, a quiet reminder that there was still more to life than routine from that day on. Ethan began visiting the gallery more often. Sometimes he'd bring coffee, sometimes just conversation. They became comfortable in each other's company, the way two people do when they stop pretending. There was no rush, no need to impress, just honesty. Some evenings they'd sit in silence, both looking at her unfinished canvases. Sometimes she'd ask for his opinion, and even though he wasn't an artist, he always spoke from feeling, not technique. She liked that. It reminded her that her art could reach people beyond critics and galleries. One Friday evening, they found themselves sitting by the large front window as the city lights flickered outside. Claire was painting while Ethan watched, his jacket draped over the back of a chair. "You always paint the ocean," he said quietly. "Why?" Claire paused, her brush hovering above the canvas. "Because it's never still," she said after a moment. "Even when it looks calm, there's movement underneath. It hides storms." Ethan stared at the painting, her words settling deep inside him. "I think people are like that too," he said. She smiled, her eyes soft. "Yes, especially the ones who pretend they're fine." Their eyes met again, and for a brief moment the air between them felt charged, warm, fragile, and alive. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. After that evening, something began to change. They still met at the gallery, still talked about art and books and life. But there was a new kind of awareness between them. Every glance felt heavier, every silence deeper. They both felt it but were afraid to name it. Ethan started noticing small things about her. The way she bit her lip when she concentrated. The way her voice softened when she spoke about the past. The way she tried to hide pain behind humor. Claire noticed things about him too. The way he looked at the world like he was searching for meaning. The way his smile never quite reached his eyes. They never called what was happening love. But it was something close, the quiet kind that sneaks up on you before you realize it's there. One evening, as they closed up the gallery, Claire turned to him and said, "You always come at the right time." "It's strange," Ethan smiled. "Maybe it's not strange. Maybe it's just meant to be." She looked at him curiously. "Do you believe in that? Meant to be?" He hesitated, then said, "I didn't. But lately, I'm not so sure." The way he said it made her heart skip. She wanted to ask what he meant, but she didn't. Some truths are better left unsaid until they're ready. When he walked her to her car that night, the air was cool and still. The streetlights reflected in small puddles on the road, and the only sound was their footsteps. They stopped by her car door. She turned to face him, smiling softly. "Good night, Ethan," he nodded, returning her smile. "Good night, Claire." She got in, but before driving off, she looked at him through the window. For a moment, neither moved. Then she drove away, her taillights glowing red against the wet street. Ethan stood there, hands in his pockets, watching until her car disappeared around the corner. On his way home, he tried to convince himself it was just friendship, that he was reading too much into it. But his heart knew better. There was something about her that made him feel alive again. Something that reminded him what it meant to feel connected to another person. Meanwhile, Claire lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, thinking about him. She had told herself she wouldn't let anyone in again. Her past heartbreak still haunted her in quiet moments. But with Ethan, things felt different. There was no rush, no expectation, just something real and unforced. It scared her, but it also gave her hope. Days passed, and their bond only grew stronger. They began to share more small stories, fears, dreams they'd given up on. Sometimes they disagreed, sometimes they laughed until they cried. It all felt real, and that's what made it dangerous. Both of them knew something was coming, something inevitable. The kind of moment that either changes everything or ends everything. They didn't know which yet, but they both felt it. And one night, as Ethan locked eyes with her across the quiet gallery, he realized there was no turning back. Whatever this was between them, it was already too deep to ignore. Outside, thunder began to roll again, and the sound of rain started tapping against the glass. The city blurred in silver reflections. Inside, two people stood in the soft light, pretending not to feel what they already knew was real. And though they hadn't said a word, their hearts had already started to remember what it was like to love, truly love, again. The storm rolled in before sunset. Thick gray clouds hung low over the city, and the streets glimmered with fresh rain. The small art gallery on Maple Street was almost empty, except for two people, Ethan and Claire. They had stayed late, working together to set up her new exhibit. Outside, thunder rumbled softly, and inside. Only the hum of the old ceiling lights broke the silence. It had been months since that first night they met, but everything between them still felt new. They had grown close, too close. Maybe Ethan had started helping her with the exhibit after work, claiming he just needed a distraction. But both of them knew it wasn't about the art anymore. It was about being near each other. That evening, Claire wore a loose white shirt splattered with paint. Her hair was tied back, but strands kept falling forward, brushing against her cheek as she worked. Ethan couldn't stop glancing at her. Every small movement, every quiet hum she made while adjusting the lights, it drew him in. He kept reminding himself to stay focused, to keep his thoughts clean. But his heart wasn't listening anymore. "Pass me the frame," she asked, looking over her shoulder. He handed it to her, their fingers brushing. It was nothing an ordinary touch, but it sent a wave through him that he couldn't explain. She froze too, just for a second, before looking away quickly. The tension in the room grew thicker, more real. They both tried to act normal, talking about the art, about the guests who might come to the opening. But beneath every word was something unspoken, something that refused to stay quiet. When the last painting was hung, Claire sighed in relief. "Finally done," she said, brushing her hands together. Ethan smiled, trying to hide how nervous he felt. "You did great," he said softly. "It looks perfect." She turned to him then, standing just a few feet away. The dim light from the lamp above cast soft shadows across her face. "You've helped me so much," she said. "I don't think I could have done this without you." Ethan shook his head. "You don't owe me anything." "I didn't say I did," she replied gently, her voice quiet but steady. "I just meant I'm glad you're here." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The rain outside started again, tapping lightly against the windows. The whole room felt alive with something fragile and powerful. Claire walked closer, her eyes locked on his. "You've been distant lately," she said, almost whispering. "Did I do something?" Ethan's throat tightened. He looked away. "No, you didn't. I'm just trying to be careful." "Careful." She repeated. "About what?" He met her eyes then, and she saw everything, every thought he had tried to hide. "About this," he said. "About us." Her breath caught, and she didn't move. The sound of thunder echoed faintly. "Ethan," she began, but her voice trailed off. He took a step closer. "I've been trying not to feel this," he said quietly, "because it's complicated, because it shouldn't happen. But every time I see you, I forget why I'm supposed to stop." Claire looked at him like she wanted to speak, but couldn't find the right words. Her hands trembled slightly as she crossed her arms. "And if you stop trying?" she asked, her tone barely audible. That question hung in the air like lightning waiting to strike. Ethan's heart pounded. He didn't answer right away. He just looked at her, the woman who had walked into his life by chance and made everything uncertain and beautiful at the same time. Slowly, he stepped closer until there was almost no space left between them. "Then everything changes," he said softly. The rain outside grew heavier, beating against the glass like a pulse. Claire didn't move back. She didn't speak. She just looked at him with eyes that said she understood, that she felt the same pull, the same fear. He reached out, not to hold her, but to touch a loose strand of hair that had fallen near her cheek. His fingers brushed her skin gently, and she closed her eyes. It was such a small gesture, but it carried all the emotion they'd both been holding back for weeks. When she opened her eyes again, there was no hesitation, just silence, deep and full of meaning. Ethan wanted to say something, but no words came. The truth was already there, alive in that quiet moment. He could feel her heartbeat in the air, could feel his own matching it. Everything they'd avoided, the feelings, the tension, the longing, was suddenly too real to ignore. But then she stepped back slightly, her voice shaking. "Ethan, we need to think." He nodded slowly, though his chest ached. "I know." Neither of them wanted to leave. They both knew what staying could mean, but walking away felt impossible. The storm outside grew louder, lightning flashing across the sky, and for a second the entire room glowed white before falling back into shadow. Claire looked toward the window, her voice quiet. "I haven't felt this alive in a long time," she said. Ethan smiled sadly. "Me neither." He didn't reach for her again, but she felt his gaze on her like a touch. And when she looked back at him, she knew he wasn't the kind of man who said things he didn't mean. Whatever was between them wasn't a passing moment. It was something deeper. Something that frightened them both because it was real. They stood there for a while, letting the sound of rain fill the silence. No one spoke, no one moved. And then, as if the world had decided for them, the power flickered and went out. The gallery was plunged into darkness, except for the faint silver light of the storm. In that dim glow, Ethan's voice came through the quiet. "I'll lock up," he said softly. "You should go before it gets worse outside." Claire hesitated. She wanted to stay, but she nodded. "Okay." She grabbed her coat and walked toward the door, stopping beside him. "Thank you for tonight." He nodded, unable to find his voice. She hesitated again, then opened the door. The bell chimed faintly, and the rain swallowed the sound as she stepped out. Ethan stood still for a long time after she left, the echo of her presence still filling the room. He ran his hand through his hair, exhaling deeply. Everything he had tried to control, every wall he had built, had cracked tonight. He couldn't hold back any more, not from the truth, not from her, not from what this connection had become. Outside, Claire walked through the rain without opening her umbrella. She didn't care about getting wet. Her heart was racing, her thoughts a blur. She didn't know where this would lead or what tomorrow would bring, but she knew something had changed. That night, nothing physical happened. No confession, but everything emotional did. Their hearts had already crossed the line. Their words were too afraid to touch. And from that moment on, both of them knew there would be no going back. Morning came quietly after the storm. The city was washed clean, the air soft and fresh with the scent of rain. The clouds were breaking apart, letting pale sunlight spill over the rooftops. Claire stood at the pier near the waterfront, her hands tucked inside her coat pockets, her eyes lost somewhere on the horizon. The waves moved gently, brushing against the wooden posts, whispering like old memories. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Ethan's face under that dim gallery light, saw the way his eyes had held her steady, open, full of something she wasn't ready to name. She told herself nothing had happened last night, but her heart refused to agree. Something had changed. Something deep and unspoken. She heard footsteps behind her and turned. Ethan stood there, his hair still damp from the morning mist, his hands in his pockets. He looked tired, but there was a calmness in his eyes that wasn't there before. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. The quiet between them wasn't awkward, it was honest. "You came," Claire said softly. He nodded. "I didn't know if I should, but I couldn't stay away." She smiled faintly. "That makes two of us." They both turned to face the water. Seagulls circled above, and the sun began to rise higher, coloring the sky in shades of gold and pink. It felt like the world had slowed down just for them. After a long silence, Claire spoke. "Last night, it felt like everything I've been trying to hide just came to the surface." Ethan exhaled, his breath visible in the cool air. "You're not the only one." She glanced at him, searching his face. "Then what happens now?" He took a step closer, his voice calm but steady. "Now we stop pretending." Her lips parted slightly, but she didn't speak. He continued, "I don't know where this goes, Claire. I don't know if it's right or if it's smart. But I know it's real." She looked down at the water, her thoughts tangled. "Real doesn't always mean easy." "Hey," he smiled sadly. "Nothing worth feeling ever is." For a while, they just stood there, letting the wind move through their silence. Claire's heart felt heavy and light at the same time. She wanted to protect herself, but part of her was tired of living behind safe walls. "You scare me, Ethan," she admitted finally. "Why?" he asked softly. "Because you make me feel again," she said. "And I promised myself I wouldn't." He didn't answer right away. He just looked at her, really looked at her the way you look at something you know could change your life. "Then maybe," he said gently, "it's time to break that promise. Claire turned her head away, blinking back tears she didn't expect. You don't understand. I've already lost someone I cared about. I can't go through that again. I'm not asking you to promise forever, he said. I'm asking you to give right now a chance. The simplicity of his words hit her harder than she expected. There was no pressure, no grand gesture, just honesty. That was what made it feel so real. The waves splashed softly against the pier, and the wind picked up, pushing a strand of her hair across her face. Ethan reached out instinctively, brushing it aside. His touch was light, almost hesitant, but it carried warmth that sank deep into her chest. She looked up at him then, really seeing him, his tired eyes, his nervous smile, the quiet sincerity that set him apart. In that moment, she realized what scared her most wasn't losing him. It was the idea that she might never have met him at all. You always say the right thing, she whispered. He shook his head. No, I just mean what I say. For a long heartbeat, the world went still. The noise of the city seemed to fade away. It was just them standing there at the edge of something neither of them had planned for. Finally, Claire spoke again, her voice low but certain. Okay, let's stop pretending. Ethan smiled, small, genuine, full of relief. He didn't rush forward, didn't pull her into his arms. He just stood beside her, their shoulders brushing. That small contact was enough. It said everything words couldn't. The sun climbed higher, lighting the water in brilliant gold. Claire took a deep breath, feeling the air fill her lungs like she hadn't breathed properly in years. You know, she said, smiling faintly, I used to think storms only brought chaos. Ethan glanced at her. And now? Now I think maybe storms clear the air so we can finally see what matters. He nodded, his eyes soft. I like that. They both fell silent again, but this time it wasn't the silence of confusion, it was peace. For the first time, the weight they both carried seemed to lift. Ethan looked out toward the horizon. It's strange, he said quietly. We've known each other for months, but last night felt like the first time I really met you. Claire smiled gently. Maybe that's what happens when people stop hiding. He turned toward her, then, his expression serious but kind. Claire, whatever happens from here, I don't want you to regret it. She looked back at him, steady and calm. I won't. Not this. He reached for her hand, not quickly, not forcefully, but with quiet certainty. She let him. Their fingers intertwined easily, as if they'd been waiting for that moment. The world kept moving around them. The water, the wind, the distant hum of the city, but it all felt far away. Right then, only this moment mattered. Claire leaned her head slightly on his shoulder, and he exhaled slowly, a soft smile forming on his lips. Nothing about their lives was suddenly perfect. There were still fears, doubts, and unanswered questions. But there was also something new, hope. As the sunlight reflected off the waves, Claire whispered, You know, I almost didn't open the gallery that night. Ethan chuckled softly. Then I guess we both would have missed the best mistake of our lives. She smiled at that, and they both laughed quietly. The kind of laughter that comes from relief, from understanding, from finally letting go of control. The sound of the waves grew softer, the morning brighter. They stood together in silence again, not needing to speak. They didn't need to define what they were or where they were going. All they knew was that the storm that once frightened them had led them here to something honest. Something rare. As they began to walk along the pier, Claire said, Do you think people can really start over? Ethan looked at her, his voice warm. I don't think we start over. I think we just start where we should have been all along. She nodded, the words settling deep inside her. Maybe life wasn't about fixing what was broken. It was about finding someone who saw beauty in the cracks. When they reached the end of the pier, the city stretched behind them, the ocean before them and the sun above. Claire turned to Ethan and said quietly, That night changed everything, didn't it? He smiled, his eyes full of quiet emotion. Yeah, it did. And as they stood there, side by side, watching the waves shimmer under the light, Both of them knew that love didn't always arrive with fireworks or perfect timing. Sometimes it came quietly through rain, through silence, through moments you never expected. That night had changed everything, not because of what they did, but because they finally stopped holding back, and from that morning on, neither of them ever did again.